In the quiet, seemingly idyllic town nestled by the Missouri River, a perfect life can hide the darkest secrets. Sisters Amelia and Diane were once inseparable, but as they grew older, their paths diverged. Diane's life seemed flawless: an adoring husband, two beautiful children, and a picture-perfect home. But for Amelia, loneliness and envy festered beneath the surface. What began as admiration for her sister's life soon turned into a dangerous obsession, leading to an affair with her brother-in-law, Trevor. Their secret meetings ignited a fire that would end in a shocking and brutal murder. What truly happens when envy turns into obsession? And how far would someone go to possess the life they think they deserve? Join us as we unravel the chilling true crime story of betrayal, desire, and murder, a tale where hidden passions boil over into deadly consequences. If you're fascinated by true crime, dark family secrets, and stories where everything is not as it seems, subscribe to our True Crime series. Each week, we dive deep into the most gripping, real-life cases, exploring the psychology behind the crimes and the people who commit them. Don't miss out on the twists and turns. Subscribe now and stay up to date with more stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Let's dive on. In the heart of this small town stood a house that, to outsiders, looked like the perfect symbol of family life. It was a stately, well-maintained home set on the outskirts, surrounded by a white picket fence and blooming flowers. It belonged to the Hastings family, Diane, her husband Trevor, and their two charming children. The house was a reflection of the life they had built together, perfect, harmonious, and enviable in every way. Or so it seemed. Diane Hastings was the picture of success. Tall, elegant, and confident, she had always been the girl with a plan. From the time she was a child, Diane had known what she wanted out of life and went after it with determination. She graduated at the top of her class, attended a prestigious college, and quickly climbed the ladder in her career. Her life seemed meticulously planned, from her job at a successful marketing firm to her marriage to Trevor, a man as charismatic and handsome as he was devoted. Their children were the embodiment of their perfect life, smart, well-mannered, and full of promise. Diane was used to admiration. People in town looked up to her, envied her, and even whispered about how her life seemed to glide forward without any of the usual struggles. Diane, for her part, relished the attention. She loved the sense of control she had over her life, the way everything fell into place, as if it were meant to be. But what outsiders didn't see, what even Diane herself had long ignored, were the cracks that had begun to form beneath the surface of her perfect life. Amelia, Diane's younger sister, had never shared the same confidence or sense of purpose. Growing up, she had always been the more reserved of the two, content to stay in Diane's shadow. Amelia had admired Diane's ambition, her drive, her ability to achieve anything she set her mind to. But as they grew older, that admiration turned into something else, something darker, more corrosive. Amelia's own life was a far cry from Diane's. Where Diane had a stable career, a loving husband, and a beautiful family, Amelia drifted from one temporary job to the next, never finding her footing. At 28, she was still living alone in a small, modest apartment in the town center, scraping by on a part-time job at the library. Her relationships never lasted, her friendships faded, and her sense of loneliness grew with each passing year. Amelia was no stranger to self-doubt, but lately, that doubt had transformed into a gnawing sense of envy that ate away at her from the inside. Diane, though she was aware of Amelia's struggles, didn't seem to notice the depth of her sister's pain. Their interactions were cordial, even warm at times, but there was always a subtle undercurrent of condescension in Diane's tone, as though she were speaking to someone who hadn't quite figured out life yet. This only deepened Amelia's sense of inferiority. Despite her best efforts, she couldn't escape the feeling that she had failed, that Diane was everything she wasn't, everything she would never be. It wasn't just Diane's success that stung, though. It was Trevor. Trevor Hastings had swept Diane off her feet years ago, and their relationship had quickly blossomed into a marriage that seemed straight out of a romance novel. Trevor was tall, handsome, and charming, with an easygoing nature that drew people to him. He was the kind of man who made everyone around him feel important, and it was no wonder that Diane had fallen for him. Together, they were the golden couple, the ones everyone admired and envied. But for Amelia, Trevor represented something else. He was the living embodiment of everything she lacked: a stable, loving partner, someone who truly cared. Over the years, she had watched from the sidelines as Trevor and Diane built their life together, always imagining what it would be like to have something or someone like that. The more Amelia saw Trevor, the more her envy grew. It wasn't just that she wanted what Diane had, it was that she felt entitled to it. The injustice of it all weighed on her like a leaden cloak, suffocating her thoughts, and it wasn't long before those thoughts turned into something far more dangerous. The turning point came one cold fall evening when Diane invited Amelia to dinner. It was meant to be a simple get-together between sisters, a chance for them to catch up over coffee. Diane had been as cheerful as ever, talking about her children, her plans for the future, and Trevor's latest promotion at work. Amelia had smiled and nodded at all the right moments, but inside, she was seething. She had always managed to hide her envy, but that night it was harder than ever. After dinner, they walked together to the parking lot where Trevor was waiting in the car to pick Diane up. He greeted Amelia warmly, his signature smile lighting up his face. But something was different this time. As he opened the door for Diane, his eyes lingered on Amelia for just a moment too long. Long enough for her to notice. It was a fleeting glance, but in that brief second, Amelia felt something stir deep within her. It wasn't just admiration for Trevor's looks or charm. It was something far more intense. From that moment on, something changed in Amelia. That brief look, that split second of attention, planted a seed that quickly took root in her mind. She began to think about Trevor more and more, at first casually, but soon with an intensity that surprised even her. It wasn't just that she was attracted to him. Though she was, it was the fact that in Trevor, she saw everything she had ever wanted. He was a symbol of the life she could never have, and the more she thought about him, the more her feelings for him grew. Weeks passed and life went on as usual, or so it seemed. Amelia continued her part-time job at the library, her loneliness her constant companion. But thoughts of Trevor lingered in her mind like a forbidden fruit. She tried to push them away, to focus on other things, but no matter how hard she tried, Trevor's image kept coming back. It was absurd, she knew. He was married to her sister, after all, but she couldn't help herself. It wasn't long before fate intervened again. One afternoon, while grocery shopping at the local supermarket, Amelia bumped into Trevor. He was alone, and they exchanged pleasantries as people do in small towns. At first, the conversation was innocent, small talk about the weather, the town, and their lives. But as they talked, Amelia noticed something different. Trevor seemed more attentive than usual, his gaze lingering on her a little longer, his smile a little warmer. There was a spark between them that she hadn't felt before, and it sent a shiver down her spine. Amelia left the supermarket that day with her heart racing. She told herself that it was just a fluke, that she was reading too much into the interaction. But the truth was she couldn't stop thinking about him. And as the days went on, those thoughts only grew stronger. Trevor, too, had felt the spark. He couldn't deny that there was something about Amelia that drew him in, something different from what he had with Diane. Amelia was quieter, more introspective, and in her, he saw a vulnerability that Diane didn't possess. Diane was confident, self-assured, always in control. But Amelia needed him in a way that Diane never had. It was intoxicating. Their paths continued to cross, and each time they met, the tension between them grew. At first, it was just casual encounters, a wave here, a conversation there, but soon those encounters became more frequent. They began to seek each other out, finding excuses to see one another. Trevor would stop by the library during his lunch break, or they would bump into each other at the coffee shop. Their conversations remained light, but beneath the surface, there was a growing connection that neither of them could ignore. Amelia knew what she was doing was dangerous. Trevor was her sister's husband, and pursuing anything with him would be a betrayal of the worst kind. But the more time she spent with him, the less she cared. The jealousy she had felt toward Diane for so many years had transformed into something else, something darker. It wasn't just envy anymore. It was a desire to possess what Diane had, to take it from her. Trevor, too, was caught in a web of conflicting emotions. He loved Diane, or at least he thought he did, but his feelings for Amelia were undeniable. He tried to resist them, tried to tell himself that it was just a harmless attraction, but the more time he spent with Amelia, the more he realized that it was more than that. He was drawn to her in a way that he hadn't been drawn to anyone in years, and the more he saw her, the harder it became to resist. Their relationship crossed a line one evening when they found themselves alone in the park, a place where they had often met under the guise of chance encounters. The air was crisp with the chill of autumn, and the leaves crunched beneath their feet as they walked along the path. They talked about nothing in particular, but the tension between them was palpable. As they stood by the riverbank, watching the water flow by, Trevor turned to Amelia, and without thinking, he reached out and took her hand. Amelia's heart skipped a beat. She knew, in that moment, that everything was about to change. She looked up at Trevor, and he met her gaze with an intensity that sent shivers down her spine. Without a word, he leaned in and kissed her. The kiss was brief, but it was electric. It was the kind of kiss that left no room for doubt, no room for turning back. In that moment, they both knew that they had crossed a line, and there was no going back. After that night, their meetings became more frequent, and their relationship deepened. They began to meet in secret, finding secluded spots where no one would see them. At first, it was just stolen kisses and lingering touches, but soon their relationship became physical. They couldn't get enough of each other, and the more they were together, the more their desire for one another grew. Amelia felt like she had finally found what she had been searching for all these years. Trevor made her feel special, important, in a way that no one else ever had. He was everything she had ever wanted, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly alive. The envy she had once felt for Diane had been replaced by something far more dangerous, a desire to take what was rightfully hers. But as their relationship deepened, so did the guilt. Trevor knew that what they were doing was wrong, and every time he went home to Diane, the weight of his betrayal pressed down on him like a stone. He loved Diane. He had built a life with her, after all, but his passion for Amelia was overwhelming. The more time he spent with her, the harder it became to reconcile his feelings. He was torn between his duty to his family and his desire for Amelia, and the tension was beginning to take its toll. Diane, too, began to notice the changes in Trevor. At first, it was subtle. He would come home later than usual or seem distracted during their conversations. But as time went on, the distance between them grew more pronounced. Trevor was no longer the attentive, loving husband he had once been. He was withdrawn, preoccupied, and Diane couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. One evening, after Trevor came home late again, Diane confronted him. She asked him what was going on, why he had been so distant lately, but Trevor's answers were vague and unconvincing. He assured her that everything was fine, that he was just stressed from work, but Diane knew better. She could see the truth in his eyes. Something had changed, and she didn't know how to fix it. Meanwhile, Amelia and Trevor continued their affair, each meeting more passionate and reckless than the last. They knew they were playing with fire, but they couldn't stop. The more they were together, the more their desire for each other grew, and the harder it became to keep their relationship a secret. Amelia knew that what they were doing was wrong, but she didn't care. She had finally found the love she had been searching for, and she wasn't about to give it up. Trevor was hers now, and she would do whatever it took to keep him. But as their relationship deepened, so did the tension. Trevor was growing increasingly torn between his love for Amelia and his guilt over betraying Diane. He knew that he couldn't keep living this double life, and the pressure was beginning to weigh on him. He started to pull away from Amelia, trying to distance himself from the affair, but every time he did, she pulled him back in. Amelia, too, was starting to feel the strain. She knew that their relationship couldn't last forever, but she didn't want to face the reality of what that meant. She had pinned all her hopes and dreams on Trevor, and the thought of losing him was unbearable. She couldn't go back to the way things were before, not after everything they had shared. One evening, after a particularly heated argument, Trevor made a decision. He couldn't keep living this way. He loved Amelia, but he loved Diane too, and the guilt was tearing him apart. He had to end the affair, no matter how much it hurt. That night, Trevor called Amelia and asked her to meet him at their usual spot in the park. It was a place they had gone to many times before, a secluded area by the river where they could be alone. But this time, Trevor's heart was heavy with the weight of what he had to do. When Amelia arrived, she could sense that something was wrong. Trevor was distant, his expression serious, and she felt a knot of anxiety form in her stomach. She knew, deep down, that this conversation wasn't going to go the way she wanted it to. "We need to talk," Trevor said, his voice low. Amelia's heart sank. She had heard those words before, and they never led to anything good. "What's wrong?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Trevor took a deep breath. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice strained. "This us. It has to stop." Amelia stared at him, her mind racing. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. Trevor couldn't just walk away from her, not after everything they had been through. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice rising in panic. "We love each other. You said you loved me." Trevor looked away, his jaw clenched. "I do love you," he said, his voice filled with anguish. "But this is wrong, Amelia. I can't keep lying to Diane. I can't keep living this double life. It's destroying me." Amelia felt a wave of anger and desperation wash over her. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Trevor was supposed to leave Diane, not her. "You can't just leave me," she said, her voice trembling. "We've come too far. You promised me, Trevor. You said we had a future." Trevor shook his head, his eyes filled with regret. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "but this has to end." Amelia's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She couldn't believe this was happening. Trevor had been her everything, the one person who made her feel whole. And now he was just going to walk away? "You're not leaving me," she said, her voice cold and determined. "If you leave me, I'll tell Diane everything. I'll ruin your life." Trevor stared at her, his expression stricken. He had underestimated how deep Amelia's feelings for him went, and now he realized he had pushed her too far. "Amelia, please," he said, his voice pleading. "Don't do this." But Amelia was past reason. She had invested everything in Trevor, and she wasn't going to let him leave without a fight. "If you walk away from me," she repeated, her voice hard as steel, "you'll regret it." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving Trevor standing alone in the dark. That night, something inside Amelia snapped. The pain of Trevor's rejection, the years of living in her sister's shadow, the weight of her loneliness, it all came crashing down on her at once. She couldn't bear the thought of living without Trevor, of watching him go back to Diane as if nothing had happened. The next morning, the town awoke to shocking news. Trevor Hastings was found dead in his home, the victim of a brutal attack. Diane had discovered his body and called the police in a state of shock, her screams echoing through the quiet streets as the reality of her husband's murder sank in. Detective Joshua Carter was assigned to the case, and from the moment he stepped into the Hastings home, he knew this wasn't a random act of violence. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of robbery. The attack had been personal, driven by rage and passion. As Carter began his investigation, it quickly became clear that the Hastings family wasn't as perfect as they appeared. The cracks in Trevor and Diane's marriage had been growing for some time, and it wasn't long before Carter uncovered the affair between Trevor and Amelia. Amelia, when questioned, tried to maintain her innocence, but her nervous behavior and conflicting statements only made her more suspicious. As Carter dug deeper into the case, he uncovered the full extent of Amelia's obsession with Trevor, and it became clear that she had a motive for murder. In the end, it was Amelia's own guilt that gave her away. During a tense interrogation, she broke down and confessed to the crime. In a fit of rage and despair, she had confronted Trevor the night of his death, unable to accept that he was leaving her. When he tried to end things, she lashed out, hitting him with a heavy object in a moment of blind fury. Amelia was arrested and charged with Trevor's murder, and the town was left reeling from the tragedy. Diane, devastated by the loss of her husband and the betrayal of her sister, struggled to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. In the end, The perfect life that the Hastings family had worked so hard to build crumbled under the weight of secrets, lies, and unfulfilled desires. And as the town tried to move on, the memory of what had happened lingered like a dark cloud, a reminder of how fragile even the most perfect lives can be.